My wife is cheating on me. I found out by placing cameras in her room and conducting a DNA test. I learned that our children are not my biological ones. As I walked into the bathroom, a glint of light caught my eye on the rug. I paused, noticing how the sunlight reflected off something shiny on the floor. I bent down to check, being barefoot and cautious not to step on anything sharp. Vanessa hadn't mentioned dropping anything, but that didn't mean it couldn't have happened. I finally spotted the source of the reflection, a tiny piece of foil. It was a small circle, likely the backing from a pill blister pack. Usually, that bit of foil stays attached when you push out the pill, but sometimes it detaches and ends up on the floor. One side was plain, but the other had a number, 2. It was Wednesday, so I guess the number referred to Tuesday's pill. I knew it hadn't come from me. Neither Vanessa nor I were on any medication. We had both recently undergone thorough medical checkups and were deemed healthy, with no need for daily pills. So, why was there a pill strip backing lying on the bathroom rug? At first, I couldn't spot it clearly. Without the light hitting it just right, the foil blended seamlessly with the carpet, making it almost invisible. But now that I had found it, I picked it up and examined it. The marking on the foil seemed to indicate the pills were part of a daily regimen. Immediately, birth control came to mind. However, Vanessa wasn't supposed to be on birth control anymore. I had gotten a vasectomy 2 years ago, and she didn't need it, or so I thought. Vanessa and I had agreed not to have more children after our second child, James, was born, and Vanessa never complained about menstrual cramps or any other issues that might require medication like this. My mind raced with possibilities, but none of them were comforting. Was Vanessa hiding something? Was she on medication for a condition she hadn't told me about? But we'd both had medical exams recently, and everything had come back fine. There shouldn't be any need for pills. Suddenly, a thought struck me that made my stomach churn. What if Vanessa was using birth control because she was seeing someone else? That tiny piece of foil opened a floodgate of suspicions I didn't want to face. If Vanessa was hiding something, then there might be more to find. Quietly, I decided to investigate further. I carefully placed the foil back on the rug, exactly where I had found it, to avoid arousing any suspicion. Vanessa was still asleep in bed, so I had time to look around. I started searching discreetly, not wanting to tip her off that I was snooping. Eventually, I came across a tampon box tucked away under the sink. Inside, buried beneath the tampons, was a small aspirin container. My heart pounded in my chest as I opened it. Sure enough, inside were pills, the same kind of birth control Vanessa used to take before my vasectomy. Finding the pills felt like a punch to the gut. The implications were clear. If Vanessa was using birth control again, it could only mean one thing. She was involved with someone else. My mind spiraled with dark thoughts. How long had this been going on? Who was she seeing? And, worst of all, was she cheating on me with someone who could get her pregnant? The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that Vanessa was hiding an affair. Vanessa and I had been married for 9 years. We met after university, and after a year of dating, we tied the knot when I was 26. We had 2 beautiful children, James and Sophie, and I thought we had a happy life. Vanessa worked as a personal assistant, and after returning from maternity leave, we hired an au pair to help with the kids. Vanessa's salary wasn't much higher than the cost of the au pair, but she loved her job and didn't want to give it up. I co-owned a small but successful engineering firm, and while we weren't wealthy, we were comfortable. I had always believed we had a stable, loving family. Now, though, I wasn't so sure. As I put the pills back where I found them and quietly exited the bathroom, my mind was racing. I knew I couldn't confront Vanessa without more evidence. Accusations without proof would only cause a blow-up, and I had no idea how she would react. If she was truly cheating on me, I needed to handle this carefully. I needed more than a tiny piece of foil and some hidden birth control pills. I needed something concrete, a plan. At work later that day, I couldn't focus. All I could think about was Vanessa. Was she seeing someone else? When had this started? How long had it been going on behind my back? The idea that the woman I had loved and trusted for nearly a decade could be betraying me left me feeling hollow. And then another thought struck me, a terrifying one. What if James and Sophie weren't even my children? That fear was overwhelming, but I knew I couldn't act on it until I had real answers. I decided to take action, methodically, like an engineer solving a complex problem. First, I ordered DNA testing kits for the kids. If I was going to confront Vanessa, I needed to know the full truth. I also bought surveillance gear, voice recorders, tiny cameras, and even a phone cloning kit. I wasn't proud of what I was planning, but I felt like I had no other choice. I needed to know if my suspicions were valid. The equipment arrived a few days later. By then, I had spent nearly every waking moment keeping an eye on Vanessa, but nothing about her behavior seemed different. She went about her daily routine as usual, talking about work, taking care of the kids, and spending time with me. We even maintained our usual level of intimacy, though our love life had become somewhat routine over the years. We were intimate once or twice a week, mostly on weekends when the kids slept in. There was nothing about her actions that suggested she was cheating. If she was involved with someone else, she was being incredibly careful. When the surveillance gear arrived, I set it up while Vanessa was out of the house. I placed a camera in the bathroom, one in the living room, and one in the bedroom, all in spots that would be discreet and difficult to notice. That evening, while Vanessa was showering, I took swabs of both James and Sophie's cheeks for the DNA test. It felt wrong, invading my children's privacy like this, but I needed answers. I also swabbed my own cheek and sent the samples off for testing. The results were supposed to come back within 48 business hours. By the following Wednesday, I would know the truth about whether or not I was their father. That night, I went through Vanessa's phone after cloning it. I checked her messages, emails, and call history, but there was nothing suspicious. Either she was being incredibly cautious, or there truly was nothing to find. Still, the hidden birth control pills gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The weekend passed without incident. Vanessa and I spent time together as usual, playing with the kids and even being intimate. It felt strange, going through the motions with someone I suspected of betraying me, but I needed to keep up appearances until I had the proof I needed. On Monday morning, I told Vanessa I would be working from home. After she left for the office, I checked the cameras and recorders. The bathroom camera confirmed what I had suspected. Vanessa was indeed taking the pills. But the footage from the bedroom camera revealed something even more disturbing. On Saturday evening, while I was cooking dinner, Vanessa had taken a shower. In the footage, I saw her pull out a second phone, a phone I had never seen before. She used it to send several text messages. This phone was different from the one I had cloned. It became clear to me that Vanessa had a second, secret phone that she used to communicate with someone else. After texting, she hid the phone in the air conditioning vent. The camera captured her putting it there, and suddenly everything clicked into place. This was the missing piece. I now had evidence that Vanessa was hiding something from me. I checked the vent, but the phone was gone. She must have taken it with her when she left for work. But now, I knew where she kept it while she was at home. That evening, while Vanessa was in the shower, I retrieved the phone from the air conditioning vent. I cloned it onto the new device I had bought specifically for this purpose. The cloning process took only a few minutes, and after I had finished, I returned the phone to the vent without Vanessa noticing. The next day, I sat in my office, reviewing the cloned phone. As the messages loaded, my worst fears were confirmed. The texts on this phone were intimate and detailed, between Vanessa and an unnamed individual. They revealed a long-running affair, with secret meetings and exchanges that left no doubt about what was happening. The person Vanessa was communicating with knew things about her that only a lover would know. Intimate details about her body, her preferences, and their encounters. The texts were filled with affection and familiarity, and what stung the most was that I was never mentioned. It was as if I didn't even exist in her life anymore. As I read through the messages, I felt a deep sense of betrayal. My marriage, my family, the life I had built with Vanessa, all of it was a lie. I had been living in a fantasy, believing that we were happy and secure, while she had been carrying on with someone else behind my back. I couldn't believe how blind I had been. Michelle, my secretary, knocked softly on my office door. When she saw my tear-streaked face, she stepped inside and locked the door behind her. Without saying a word, she handed me a box of tissues and sat down across from me. For the first time, she wasn't the no-nonsense, all-business Michelle I had known for years. She was just there, offering quiet support. "What happened?" she asked gently. I handed her the phone and let her read the messages. As she scrolled through them, her expression remained calm, though I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. This is bad, she said quietly. Really bad. I nodded, unable to speak. Do you know who it is? She asked. I shook my head. No, but I'm going to find out. Michelle leaned forward and took my hand, something she had never done before. Her touch was comforting, grounding me in the middle of the emotional storm I was going through. You're going to get through this, she said firmly, but you need a plan. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice cracking. I feel like my entire life is falling apart. Michelle squeezed my hand. First, we need more details. Have you gotten the DNA results back yet? I shook my head. They should be available by Wednesday. Okay, she said. We'll deal with that when the time comes. In the meantime, you need to stay calm and focus. You can't let her know what you found until you have everything in place. I nodded, though I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep up the charade. Every time I looked at Vanessa now, I felt sick. The thought of her lying to me, of her being with someone else, made my skin crawl. Michelle stood up and walked over to the window, glancing out at the city below. I've arranged for you to meet with a friend of mine, she said after a moment. Her name is Lorraine, and she's a divorce lawyer. She's handled cases like this before, and she'll know what to do. I looked up at Michelle, grateful for her help. Thank you, I said softly. She turned back to me, her expression serious. You're not alone in this, Gary. I'm going to help you through it, no matter what happens. Michelle left my office a few minutes later, and I was left alone with my thoughts. Everything felt surreal. Just days ago, I thought I had a perfect life, a loving wife, 2 kids, a successful career. Now, I was staring down the barrel of a shattered marriage and the possibility that my children weren't even mine. The following Wednesday, the DNA results came back. Both James and Sophie were not biologically mine. The revelation hit me like a freight train. I had suspected it, but seeing it confirmed in cold, clinical terms was something else entirely. My children, the ones I had loved, raised, and cared for, weren't mine. I was devastated, but there was no time to wallow in grief. With the DNA results in hand, I met with Lorraine to discuss my next steps. She was sharp and experienced, immediately outlining a plan to protect my assets and prepare for divorce proceedings. She also recommended pursuing a legal claim against Vanessa's employer, given that her affair had been with a senior executive at her company. In the days that followed, I felt like I was living in a fog. I went through the motions of my daily life, but inside, I was numb. My marriage was over, my family was torn apart, and the future I had envisioned was gone. The days after discovering the truth about Vanessa and the children felt like walking through a dense fog. Each moment seemed surreal, as if I were watching someone else's life fall apart. The realization that James and Sophie weren't biologically mine, combined with Vanessa's betrayal, left me feeling hollow, disconnected from the world around me. But there was no time to dwell on the pain. Lorraine, the divorce lawyer Michelle had recommended, was already preparing for the next steps, and I needed to be ready for whatever came next. That Wednesday, after the DNA results confirmed my worst fears, Lorraine laid out a strategic plan. The main focus was protecting my assets and ensuring that Vanessa wouldn't get more than what was fair. Lorraine was confident in her approach, especially since we had the prenup as a solid foundation. Vanessa had no claim to the business I had built, but there were still other financial aspects to handle. Lorraine's first recommendation was to begin surveillance on Vanessa's lover, whom I now knew was her boss, Bill Wright. Lorraine had a private investigator gather as much evidence as possible, footage, text messages, emails, anything that could support our case in court. The goal was to hit both Vanessa and her company hard, particularly since her relationship with Bill violated the company's non-fraternization policy. In the meantime, I had to continue living under the same roof as Vanessa, pretending that everything was normal. I couldn't let on that I knew about the affair or the fact that our children weren't mine. The waiting was excruciating, but Lorraine insisted that the timing had to be perfect. If I confronted her too soon, it could complicate the legal proceedings and give Vanessa time to cover her tracks. So I held on, swallowing my anger and sorrow while planning my next moves. Michelle had become my lifeline through all of this. After nearly a decade of working together, she knew me better than anyone. Her support during these dark times was invaluable. She wasn't just helping me with the legal strategy. She was there emotionally, giving me the strength to get through each day. And though I had never seen her as anything more than a trusted colleague before, I began to realize just how much she meant to me. But I didn't have time to dwell on my shifting feelings for Michelle. There was still so much to do. That Friday, I received a phone call from Lorraine. She had just gotten word from the private investigator that Bill Wright had been spending nights at my house while I was at work. I could feel the rage boiling inside me as she spoke. Bill had not only been sleeping with my wife, but also parading around my home as if it were his. Lorraine advised me to stay calm and focus on the bigger picture, the divorce settlement. We needed to gather as much evidence as possible before confronting Vanessa. The next few days were excruciating. Each time Vanessa spoke to me or acted as if nothing was wrong, I had to suppress the overwhelming urge to confront her. I kept thinking about the messages on her secret phone, about the lies she had told for years, about how she had allowed me to believe that James and Sophie were mine. How could she do this to me? How could she betray me like this? Michelle, ever the pragmatic and level-headed one, continued to remind me to stay the course. This is about protecting your future, she would say. Don't let your emotions ruin everything you've worked so hard for. She was right, of course. If I let my anger get the best of me, Vanessa could turn the situation around, making it harder for me to come out of the divorce with my assets intact. On Monday, the surveillance footage from the private investigator arrived. I sat with Lorraine in her office as we reviewed the evidence. The footage was damning. Bill Wright entering my home late at night, spending time with Vanessa while I was away, and even interacting with the kids. The worst part was seeing James and Sophie greet Bill with excitement, calling him Daddy Bill, as if he were some sort of surrogate father. My heart ached as I watched the scene unfold, knowing that I had been lied to for so long. "This is enough," Lorraine said as the video played. "We have everything we need to proceed." I nodded, too numb to respond. The realization that my children had developed a relationship with Bill while I had been kept in the dark was unbearable. I had raised them, loved them, and provided for them. Yet they were bonding with the man who had helped destroy my marriage. The next step, according to Lorraine, was to serve Vanessa with the divorce papers, which we planned to do at the office where she worked. Lorraine was confident that this public humiliation, combined with the evidence we had gathered, would work in our favor. Not only would Vanessa face legal repercussions, but Bill would also be held accountable for violating company policy. We were aiming for a double blow, one that would ensure Vanessa received as little as possible from the settlement. That Monday afternoon, Lorraine filed the necessary paperwork. The plan was to serve Vanessa with the divorce papers on Wednesday morning, just before an important meeting at her company. Lorraine explained that this timing would maximize the impact, leaving her no time to prepare a response. In the meantime, I was to continue acting as if nothing were wrong. But pretending was becoming harder and harder. Vanessa's presence in the house, her casual conversations, and her laughter with the kids grated on my nerves. I wanted nothing more than to tell her that I knew everything, to confront her with the truth and watch her squirm. But I had to stay patient. Wednesday would come soon enough. The morning of the planned confrontation, I left the house early, telling Vanessa I had an important meeting at work. In reality, I was headed to Lorraine's office, where we would finalize the details before serving the divorce papers. I arrived feeling a strange mix of dread and anticipation. This was the day everything would come crashing down, the day Vanessa would face the consequences of her actions. Lorraine greeted me with a calm professionalism that helped steady my nerves. "We're ready," she said, handing me a copy of the divorce petition. "Once she's served, we'll move quickly. The sooner we get this in front of a judge, the better." I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. This was it, the end of my marriage, the end of the life I had known for the past 9 years. At exactly 9 a.m., Vanessa was served. She was at work, preparing for a presentation, when a process server walked into the conference room and handed her the papers. According to Lorraine's contact at the company, Vanessa was visibly shaken. She had no idea this was coming. She had assumed that her affair with Bill was still hidden, that I was blissfully unaware of her deceit. But now, she would have to face the reality of what she had done. As the hours passed, I waited for Vanessa's call. I knew she would reach out eventually. She would want to explain, to justify her actions, or maybe even beg for forgiveness. But I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses. When my phone finally rang that afternoon, I let it go to voicemail. Vanessa called several more times over the course of the day, each call more frantic than the last. I listened to the voicemails she left, but they were all the same. Pleas for me to call her back, to let her explain. I couldn't bring myself to respond. There was nothing she could say that would change what she had done. That evening, as I sat in my office, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Vanessa. "Gary, please, we need to talk. I know you're upset, but we can work through this. I'm sorry for everything, but please don't shut me out." I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. There was so much I wanted to say, so much anger and hurt I wanted to unleash, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Vanessa had made her choices, and now she would have to live with the consequences. I put the phone down and turned back to my work, determined not to let her get under my skin any more than she already had. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and negotiations. Vanessa's lawyer attempted to fight the divorce petition, arguing for more favorable terms, but Lorraine was relentless. With the evidence we had, there was no way Vanessa could come out on top. The best she could hope for was a settlement that left her with enough to start over. As for Bill, the company had already begun disciplinary proceedings against him, and it was only a matter of time before he lost his job. Throughout it all, Michelle remained by my side, helping me navigate the complex legal landscape and providing emotional support when I needed it most. Our relationship had always been professional, but in the midst of this crisis, I found myself relying on her more than ever. She had become my rock, the one person I could count on to keep me grounded. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, I began to realize just how much I had taken Michelle for granted over the years. She had always been there, efficient, dependable, and loyal, but I had never truly appreciated her. Now, as I faced the collapse of my marriage, I found myself thinking about her in ways I hadn't before. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of negotiations, Michelle and I sat in my office, sharing a bottle of wine. It was a rare moment of relaxation in the midst of the chaos, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. "You're handling this better than I expected," Michelle said, swirling her glass of wine thoughtfully. I chuckled bitterly. I don't know if handling it is the right term. I'm just trying to survive. She gave me a sympathetic smile. "You're stronger than you think, Gary. Most people would have crumbled by now." I shrugged, not entirely sure I believed her. "I wouldn't have gotten this far without you." Michelle's smile softened, and for a moment, we just sat there in comfortable silence. There was something different in the air between us, something unspoken but undeniable. I could feel it, and I knew she could too. After a few minutes, Michelle set her glass down and looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "Gary, I need to tell you something." I tensed, wondering what was coming next. "What is it?" She hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. "I've been with you through a lot of tough times, and I know this is probably the hardest thing you've ever had to go through. But I need you to know, I care about you, more than just as your secretary." Her confession hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I felt my heart skip a beat, unsure of how to respond. I had always respected Michelle, admired her professionalism and strength, but I had never allowed myself to think of her in any other way. Until now. "I care about you too," I said quietly, meeting her gaze. "More than I realized." Michelle's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something other than anger and pain. I felt hope. We didn't say anything more after that. There was no need. The connection between us had always been there, simmering beneath the surface, and now that it had been acknowledged, there was no turning back. As the weeks passed, Michelle and I grew closer, both personally and professionally. She continued to help me navigate the divorce, but our relationship had evolved into something more than just boss and secretary. It was subtle at first, a lingering touch, a shared glance, but it quickly became clear that we were both ready to explore whatever this was between us. By the time the divorce was finalized, I had come to terms with the fact that my life would never be the same. My marriage was over, my children weren't mine, and the future I had once envisioned was gone. But with Michelle by my side, I felt like I could start anew. Vanessa, meanwhile, had moved out of the house and into a small apartment on the other side of town. We had agreed on a settlement that left her with enough to rebuild her life, but she had lost custody of the children. They weren't mine biologically, but I had fought to keep them in my life, and the court had ruled in my favor. Vanessa was devastated, but there was nothing she could do. As for Bill Wright, he had been fired from his position and was now facing legal action from both me and the company. His reputation was in tatters, and his career was effectively over. It was a small victory, but it brought me some satisfaction knowing that he wouldn't walk away from this unscathed. In the end, I had lost a lot, but I had also gained something I hadn't expected, a new beginning with Michelle. Together, we began to build a life that was entirely our own, free from the lies and betrayals of the past. It wasn't easy, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about the future. In the weeks following the finalization of my divorce from Vanessa, life slowly began to take on a new shape. The immediate chaos had passed. Court hearings were behind me, the legal battles were over, and Vanessa had moved out of the house. The home we had shared for nearly a decade now felt like a hollow shell, haunted by the memories of betrayal. I wasn't sure I wanted to live there anymore. I had considered selling the house many times, especially after Vanessa left. Every room felt like it held a piece of the life we had built together, a life that no longer existed. Each corner seemed to remind me of the lies, the deception, and the fact that the children I had loved and raised were not biologically mine. But there was another side to the story. The house had also been the backdrop for some of the happiest moments of my life. I had built my family there, raised my children there, and I wasn't sure I was ready to walk away from it entirely. Michelle had been urging me to move on. "You need a fresh start, Gary," she would tell me. "Staying in that house is just going to keep you tied to the past." She wasn't wrong, but leaving felt like another loss on top of the many I had already endured. Still, I knew that Michelle was right. Every day I stayed in the house, I felt like I was living in the shadow of what once was, unable to step fully into the future. And then there were the children, James and Sophie. Even though the DNA results had confirmed that they weren't biologically mine, I still felt a deep connection to them. They were my children in every way that mattered, and I had fought hard to retain custody. The court had ruled in my favor, allowing me to remain their legal guardian, while Vanessa was granted visitation rights. Despite everything, I wanted to be there for them, to give them the stability they needed after all the turmoil. But parenting after the divorce was different. It was a strange, surreal experience, navigating life as a single father with children who had no idea that the man raising them wasn't their biological father. Vanessa and I had agreed not to tell them, at least not yet. They were too young to understand, and I didn't want to burden them with the complexity of the situation. But I knew that one day, when they were older, I would have to explain the truth. Despite the heavy emotional toll of the past few months, there was one bright spot in my life, Michelle. Our relationship had blossomed into something more than I ever expected. She had been my rock through everything, and now, we were exploring the possibility of a future together. It wasn't something either of us had planned, but it felt natural, like the next chapter in both of our lives. Michelle had been a constant presence in my life for almost a decade. As my secretary, she had always been professional, efficient, and loyal. But as we grew closer, I realized there was so much more to her than I had ever seen before. She was kind, supportive, and had an inner strength that I admired deeply. She had helped me navigate the darkest period of my life, and in doing so, we had forged a bond that went beyond the workplace. Our relationship had started slowly, almost hesitantly. We had both been cautious, not wanting to rush into anything, especially given everything I had been through with Vanessa. But over time, we grew more comfortable with each other, and our feelings deepened. There was something about Michelle that made me feel at ease, like I could finally breathe after years of holding my breath. She understood me in a way that no one else did, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could trust someone completely. One evening, a few weeks after the divorce had been finalized, Michelle and I were sitting on the back porch of my house, sipping wine as the sun set. The kids were with Vanessa for the weekend, and the quiet stillness of the evening felt like a welcome reprieve from the chaos of the past year. "You know," Michelle said, breaking the silence, "you don't have to stay here, Gary. We could find a place of our own. Somewhere new." I looked out over the yard, the same yard where James and Sophie had played countless times. The thought of leaving this place, of leaving behind all the memories, was hard to swallow. But Michelle was right. Staying here wasn't doing me any favors. I needed a fresh start, and so did she. "I've been thinking about that," I admitted, taking a sip of my wine. "But it's hard, you know? This house, it's been home for so long." Michelle nodded, understanding. "I get it. But home doesn't have to be tied to a place. It's the people you share your life with that make it home. And we can build a new one, together." Her words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. She was right. Home wasn't about the walls or the roof. It was about the people. And with Michelle by my side, I knew we could create something new, something better than what I had before. "I think you're right," I said, setting my glass down and turning to face her. "Maybe it's time to start over." Michelle smiled, her eyes softening. "I'm glad to hear that." We sat in silence for a while, just enjoying each other's company. The air was warm, and the sky was painted with the colors of the setting sun. It was one of those rare moments of peace that I had come to cherish. As the weeks passed, Michelle and I began looking for a new house together. It felt strange at first, the idea of building a life with someone new after everything I had been through with Vanessa. But it also felt exciting, like I was finally moving forward, leaving the pain of the past behind. We eventually found a place that felt right. It was a modest, two-story house on the outskirts of town, with plenty of room for the kids and a backyard where they could play. It wasn't as grand as the house I had shared with Vanessa, but that was part of its charm. It felt cozy, welcoming, like a fresh start. Once we had moved in, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Michelle and I found a balance between work and home life, and the kids adjusted surprisingly well to the change. They adored Michelle, and she was great with them, patient, kind, and always willing to lend a helping hand. Vanessa, on the other hand, had become a more distant presence in their lives. She still had visitation rights, but her relationship with the kids had been strained since the divorce. I wasn't sure if it was guilt or something else, but she seemed to be pulling away, leaving me to pick up the pieces. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to give James and Sophie the stability they needed, even if Vanessa couldn't. One weekend, while the kids were at Vanessa's, Michelle and I decided to take a short trip to the mountains. It was a spontaneous decision, one that felt like a breath of fresh air after months of dealing with the fallout from the divorce. We packed a few bags, jumped in the car, and headed out of town, leaving the worries of everyday life behind for a few days. The cabin we rented was nestled in a quiet, wooded area, surrounded by towering pine trees and overlooking a serene lake. It was the perfect escape, a chance to reconnect and relax. We spent our days hiking, exploring the nearby trails, and simply enjoying each other's company. In the evenings, we would sit by the fire, talking about everything and nothing, our conversations flowing easily and naturally. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Michelle brought up something I hadn't expected. "I've been thinking about the future," she said, her voice soft as she stared into the flames. I turned to look at her, curious. "What about it?" She hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I know this might sound crazy, but have you ever thought about having more kids?" The question caught me off guard. After everything that had happened with Vanessa and the children, I hadn't really considered the possibility of starting a new family. I had convinced myself that James and Sophie were enough, that I didn't need anything more. But hearing Michelle ask the question made me realize that maybe, just maybe, I wanted more. "I don't know," I admitted, leaning back in my chair. "I guess I haven't thought about it much." Michelle nodded, understanding. "I get that, and I don't want to rush into anything. But it's something to think about, right?" I smiled, reaching over to take her hand. "Yeah, it's something to think about." We didn't talk about it much after that, but the idea lingered in the back of my mind. For the first time since the divorce, I found myself imagining a future that wasn't defined by the past. A future with Michelle, maybe even with more children. It was a strange, hopeful feeling, one that I hadn't allowed myself to embrace for a long time. The trip to the mountains was exactly what we needed. By the time we returned home, I felt refreshed, ready to face whatever came next. And as the weeks turned into months, life continued to move forward. Michelle and I settled into our new home. The kids grew more comfortable with the changes, and the wounds from the past slowly began to heal. One day, as I was picking James up from school, he asked me a question that I hadn't been prepared for. "Dad," he said, climbing into the car, "why don't we see Mom as much anymore?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been dreading this moment, knowing that one day, James and Sophie would start asking questions about Vanessa, about the divorce, about everything that had happened. But I hadn't expected it to come so soon. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Well, buddy, sometimes things change. Your mom and I aren't together anymore, but we both still love you very much." James frowned, clearly not satisfied with my answer. "But why did you stop being together? Did you have a fight?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to tell him. He was only 7 years old, too young to understand the complexities of what had happened between Vanessa and me. But I didn't want to lie to him either. "Your mom and I, we just weren't happy together anymore," I said carefully. "It wasn't because of you or Sophie. It was something between us. But that doesn't mean we don't love you." James seemed to accept my answer, but I could tell he was still confused. I knew that one day, when he was older, I would have to tell him the full truth. But for now, this was enough. Later that evening, after I had put the kids to bed, I sat down with Michelle and told her about the conversation. "It was bound to happen eventually," she said, her voice gentle. "Kids are curious. They want to know why their world has changed. I just don't know how to handle it," I admitted. "How do I explain everything to them without hurting them?" Michelle reached over and took my hand. "You'll figure it out, Gary. You've always done what's best for them. And when the time comes, you'll know what to say." Her words reassured me, but the weight of the situation still hung heavy on my shoulders. I knew that as the kids grew older, the questions would only get harder. But I also knew that I had to be honest with them when the time was right. As the months passed, life began to take on a new sense of normalcy. Michelle and I continued to grow closer, and the kids seemed to be thriving despite everything they had been through. Vanessa remained a distant presence, but she still saw the kids occasionally. Our interactions were minimal, and I preferred it that way. Then, one day, something happened that I hadn't anticipated. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in the kitchen making breakfast when the doorbell rang. Michelle was out running errands, and the kids were still asleep, so I went to answer the door. When I opened it, I was surprised to see Vanessa standing there, looking nervous and unsure of herself. "Gary," she said, her voice soft, "can we talk?" I stared at her, unsure of what to say. It had been months since we had spoken outside of the necessary arrangements for the kids, and I wasn't sure what she wanted. "Okay," I said cautiously, stepping aside to let her in. We sat down at the kitchen table, the tension between us palpable. Vanessa fidgeted with her hands, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I know I've been distant," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I know I've hurt you in ways I can't ever fully apologize for. But I wanted to say I'm sorry." I didn't respond at first, unsure of what to make of her apology. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell her that her apology wouldn't change anything. But another part of me, the part that had spent months trying to move on, felt something close to relief. "I appreciate that," I said finally, my voice measured. "But an apology doesn't erase what happened." Vanessa nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I know, and I don't expect it to. But I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize that I can't keep running from the truth. I need to be a better mother to James and Sophie. They deserve more than I've been giving them." I studied her face, trying to gauge her sincerity. She looked different, more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. It was clear that she had been carrying a lot of guilt, and for the first time since our divorce, I believed that she truly wanted to make amends. "I want to be there for them," she continued, her voice trembling. "I know I've messed up, but I'm trying to be better." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Vanessa, I don't know what you expect from me. The damage has been done. We're not going back to how things were." "I'm not asking for that," she said quickly. "I just want to be a part of their lives again." I want to be the mother they need." Her words hung in the air between us, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of understanding. Vanessa had made mistakes, big ones, but she was still their mother, and if she was willing to try, maybe I owed it to the kids to let her. "We'll see," I said finally, "but it's going to take time." Vanessa nodded, wiping away a tear. "Thank you." As she left that morning, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of emotions. I wasn't sure what the future held for Vanessa and her relationship with the kids, but I knew that I had to give her a chance. Not for me, but for them. Later that day, when Michelle returned home, I told her about Vanessa's visit. "What do you think?" she asked, her expression thoughtful. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to shut her out completely, but the other part of me knows that the kids deserve to have their mother in their lives. Michelle nodded. "It's a tough situation, but whatever you decide, I'll support you." Her words brought me comfort, and as the days passed, I found myself coming to terms with the idea of Vanessa being more involved in the children's lives. It wouldn't be easy, but I knew it was the right thing to do. In the end, life is rarely simple. But with Michelle by my side and a new future ahead of us, I felt ready to face whatever challenges came our way. The past was behind me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about what was to come. In the months that followed Vanessa's unexpected visit, life took on an even more unpredictable turn. I had agreed to let Vanessa be more involved with the kids, but I remained cautious. It was for James and Sophie's sake that I made the decision, not for hers. There was a fragile balance between wanting to protect them and allowing them to have a relationship with their mother. Even though she had hurt me deeply, she was still their mom, and they deserved to know her. Vanessa began visiting more frequently, making an effort to rebuild her relationship with the children. At first, it was awkward. There was tension in the air, and the kids seemed unsure about how to interact with her. After all, for the past several months, they had grown accustomed to living with me and Michelle. They were confused by the change, especially James, who was older and more aware of the shifts in our family dynamic. Vanessa showed up on time for her scheduled visits, and she was trying, really trying. I couldn't deny that. She'd take the kids out for ice cream, go to their soccer games, and even help them with their homework. But despite her efforts, the scars of her past actions were evident. Sophie, being younger, warmed up to her more quickly. She was naturally forgiving, her innocent mind eager to have her mom back in her life. But James was a different story. He was more guarded, asking more questions, and observing Vanessa with a quiet suspicion. It broke my heart to see him like that, a child who had once been so carefree now burdened by the complexities of adult problems. He didn't understand why his mother had been absent for so long, or why she had seemed so distant before, and I wasn't ready to explain the full truth to him. One evening, while Michelle and I were preparing dinner, James walked into the kitchen with a serious expression on his face. He had been unusually quiet all week, and I could tell something was weighing heavily on his mind. "Dad, can I talk to you?" he asked, glancing at Michelle before looking back at me. "Of course, buddy. What's up?" I wiped my hands on a towel, preparing myself for whatever question he was about to throw my way. James fidgeted, looking down at his shoes before meeting my eyes. "Why did Mom stop living with us? Was it because of something I did?" The question hit me hard, and I saw Michelle stop what she was doing, her hand frozen in the act of chopping vegetables. She glanced at me, her eyes filled with sympathy. I crouched down so that I was eye level with James. "No, buddy, you didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault." "But why then?" His voice wavered, and I could see the confusion and hurt in his eyes. "Why did she leave? And why doesn't she live with us now?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the conversation pressing down on me. I had always known this moment would come, but I still wasn't prepared for it. How could I explain the complexities of adult relationships to a 7-year-old? "Your mom and we weren't happy together anymore." I began slowly, trying to find the right words. Sometimes, adults can love each other and care about each other, but things change, and they realize they're not meant to be together. But that doesn't mean we don't both love you and Sophie very much. It just means that we needed to live apart to be happier. James frowned, clearly struggling to understand. "But why wasn't she around for so long? Why didn't she see us?" I hesitated. This was the harder part. Vanessa's absence had been a result of her own choices, choices that had hurt me deeply, but I couldn't burden James with the full truth. He wasn't ready for that. Your mom was going through a tough time, I said carefully. She needed some space to figure things out. But she's trying to be more involved now, and she loves you, James. She really does. He looked down at his shoes again, kicking the floor lightly. I don't know if I believe that. Those words cut through me, and I could see the hurt etched on his small face. Michelle stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on James' shoulder. Your mom is doing her best, James, she said softly, and it's okay to feel confused or upset about it, but you should give her a chance. She wants to be a part of your life. James looked up at her, his expression softening a little. He had grown close to Michelle over the past year, and I could see that he trusted her. She had become a steady presence in his life, someone he could rely on. Okay, he mumbled, though I could tell he was still unsure. I'll try. As he walked out of the kitchen, I let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through my hair. That conversation had been harder than I expected, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. There would be more questions, more difficult discussions in the future. But for now, I was grateful that James was willing to give Vanessa another chance, even if it was a tentative one. After dinner that night, as Michelle and I sat on the couch, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. You handled that really well, she said softly, reaching for my hand. I shook my head. I don't know. I feel like I'm constantly walking on eggshells with the kids. They deserve the truth, but I can't bring myself to tell them everything. Not yet. Michelle squeezed my hand gently. You'll know when the time is right. For now, you're doing the best you can, and that's all anyone can ask for. Her reassurance gave me some comfort, but the weight of the situation still lingered in my mind. I knew that eventually, I would have to face the full reality of what had happened with Vanessa. But for now, I was focused on keeping life as stable as possible for James and Sophie. Meanwhile, my relationship with Michelle continued to evolve. What had started as a slow, tentative connection had deepened into something real and meaningful. We had grown closer in ways I hadn't expected, and I found myself leaning on her more than I ever thought possible. There was something about Michelle that made everything feel right. She was steady, patient, and always knew exactly what to say to calm my fears or ease my anxieties. She had become not only my partner but my confidant, my best friend. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could see a future, one that wasn't weighed down by the pain of the past. One evening, after we had put the kids to bed, Michelle and I were sitting on the porch, enjoying the cool evening breeze. We often found ourselves here, talking about the day or just sitting in comfortable silence. It had become our ritual, a quiet way to unwind after the chaos of the day. Michelle was staring out at the trees, her expression peaceful, when she turned to me with a small smile. I've been thinking, she began, her voice soft, about what we talked about before, about the future. I raised an eyebrow, curious. Yeah? What about it? She took a deep breath, her smile widening. I think I'm ready for whatever comes next. Her words hung in the air between us, and I felt a surge of emotion rise in my chest. I knew what she meant. She was ready to take the next step, whatever that looked like for us. Whether it meant getting married, starting a family, or simply continuing to build our life together, Michelle was ready. And so was I. I reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. Me too, I said quietly, feeling a sense of certainty settle over me. I'm ready for whatever comes next. We didn't need to say anything more. In that moment, sitting on the porch under the stars, I knew that Michelle and I were on the same page. We had both been through so much, and yet, here we were, stronger, closer, and ready to face the future together. As the weeks passed, our relationship continued to grow. We started talking more seriously about our plans. Whether we wanted to get married, whether we wanted to have more children, these were big conversations, but they didn't feel daunting. With Michelle, everything felt easy, natural, as if we were simply following the path that had always been laid out for us. One weekend, we took the kids to the park for a picnic. It was a warm, sunny day, and the park was bustling with families enjoying the beautiful weather. James and Sophie ran off to play on the playground, their laughter filling the air as Michelle and I set up our picnic blanket under a shady tree. As we sat there, watching the kids play, Michelle turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about having more kids?" she asked, her voice casual but curious. I smiled, knowing that this was a conversation we had touched on before. "Yeah, I do. Sometimes." "And?" she pressed, a teasing glint in her eye. I chuckled, leaning back on my hands. "I think I'd like that. I mean, if it's something you want to." Michelle's smile widened, and she looked out at the playground where James and Sophie were playing. "I do. I've always wanted a family, and I can't imagine a better person to do that with than you." Her words filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. The idea of starting a family with Michelle, of building something new and beautiful together, felt like the natural next step. After everything we had been through, I knew that we were ready for whatever came next.